thank you so much for doing this. This is wonderful. I always enjoy your, uh, God, your, I don't know, how, your notes. And that's very modest to call it notes because it is more than notes and very insightful, very informative. But the last one really hit a chord for what is going on here system that is really struggling to deal with the pandemic and but also uh, you know I get the feeling that's the biggest threat and the virus that we are facing with is not really corona or whatever, it's just racism and inequality. And you touched a little bit about how our healthcare systems is not really it's just telling the story that that virus and that pandemic is hitting people, minorities, and blacks much harder than the population. Uh,
I'm just a writer and activist over the years, and publishing Nygaard notes since 1998, actually.
oh, really?
Yeah, it's unbelievable to me. And I'm writing about, I mean, one of my themes over the years has been, well, my belief is that social change has two main components, things that make social change happening. One is the work of activists who make noise and go out in the streets and do the hard work of just getting noticed and proposing things and envisioning a different future. They do the hard work. They're the front lines. The second thing that's necessary for social change is what I call kind of preparing the soil for those seeds that activists plant. So the change in consciousness, which allows the ideas of activists and future thinkers to become common currency. I think, for example, a small example is around the April 6th or 7th and 8th this year during the pandemic, suddenly there was just articles everywhere talking about how African Americans and people of color were being affected more than white people by the pandemic. Well, that fact that it was on the front pages for a couple of days, and only a couple of days, it's sort of faded now. But that's progress. I think it has a lot to do with the work of activism and Black Lives Matter activists, anti-racist educators, and all kinds of people who suddenly, they've been saying, this is not news, they've been saying this for ever,
yeah,
for 400
exactly.
years.
Yeah.
But I want to, if I may, I would like to give a little history, just a little brief history, starting with World War II. Coming out of World War II, Truman actually proposed a universal system of healthcare in the United States. And there was a great resistance. Well, first of all, it was quite popular coming out of World War II. It was happening all over the world, all over Europe. Countries were instituting public health programs and universal healthcare systems of various kinds.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty popular, including in the South. However, once it became clear that a universal healthcare system would, the other thing what Truman was doing was he issued an order desegregating the armed forces and setting up a panel to study racism in the United States. This alarmed Southern Democrats, and the South was mostly Democratic at that time in the Congress. It alarmed them so much because they thought they might be forced to desegregate their medical and health facilities. So they fought, and the popularity among Southerners for a universal system of healthcare dropped from 66% in 1845 to 22% 4 years later, when the proposal finally died due to the resistance of Southern Democrats primarily. Okay, jump ahead to 1964, 63, 64. 64, there was a Supreme Court case, I think it was 64, 63 maybe, Supreme Court case mandating that hospitals be desegregated, that it was unconstitutional to have segregated hospitals. Then in 1965, when Medicare and Medicaid were being proposed, there was a lot of very serious negotiations about how it was going to look. And one of the things that people might be aware of, I'm on Medicare myself, one of the things that people might be aware of is we have several parts to Medicare, but the main two parts are Part A and Part B. Part A being the hospital coverage, and Part B being clinical care and testing and stuff like that. Why do we have two parts? Well, it was clear to the Southern Democrats that if we had a system where universal health care for people over 65, we would have to desegregate not only our hospitals, but also our clinics and primary care centers. That was intolerable. So it was insisted that, as people know, Part A, there is no premium. Part B, there is a premium. Why is that? It allowed Southern physicians to argue that since they had to pay a premium, it was a voluntary insurance plan, not a government program. I mean, not a government mandate. So they were able to keep their clinics segregated in the face of, whereas the hospitals had to be desegregated in line with the Supreme Court order. So this kind of resistance, and this carries forward to today, that you see the states' rights being held up. It has been forever in terms of when there's a federal mandate to desegregate or to for example, Medicaid right now. There's 14 states, I think, or 13 states that have not expanded the Medicaid program as they were allowed to do under Obamacare. And those states are mostly in the South. There's South Dakota, Wisconsin, Kansas, Missouri, and the rest of them are in the Deep South. Well, why is that? Because people of color are disproportionately, poor people, they're higher representation of people of color in poverty, so they're more able to target it as a means-tested program that is trampling on states' rights, so they don't expand it to include those people. So the whole history of single-payer and Medicare, which is understood at the time to be a step toward a universal system, has been sabotaged along the way by racism. And I think the point that's important for white people to notice is that people tend to think that taking an anti-racist position is just something you do to help those people. And actually, racism corrupts the system for all of us, because Medicare being a great example, the example I just gave, and all the way down the line, as the New York Times in their 1619 project, and a great article that I referenced in my newsletter, the fact that we don't have a universal system of healthcare has everything to do with race. And that's just one example.
It really, just for somebody, an immigrant like me, and been here for many years, with all...
And you celebrated your 25th anniversary on Belladonna, I think. I appreciate it.
Exactly, and I came before that. Thank you for with all the problem this country has, and the wealthiest country with all the resources they have, I couldn't understand why the disparity between blacks and whites across the board is still a major issue here in so many fronts. The underpinning problem that is facing our social programs, and even the Green Deal and all of that, is still racism and inequality.
Right.
Why we still, 150 years later, we still have this problem?
Well, I think the larger project, let me get philosophical a little bit here. The larger project of which Trumpism, what I call Trumpism, the sort of, what do I call it, the ethno-nationalism that I call Trumpism, is based on when a society is under stress, which the United States is very much under stress for various reasons. The decline of the U.S. empire, the economy, the climate change, there's all sorts of stressors, and the ongoing functions of late-stage capitalism that have made so many American workers of all races have very precarious, part-time, no pensions, that people are sort of struggling. At times like this, a society, and John Powell in Berkeley, he used to be at the University of Minnesota, leading the Institute of Race and Poverty. Now he's in an organization called Othering and Belonging Institute. He talks about the project being, when a society is under stress, it tends to strike out against what it defines as others. It tends to narrow the criteria for who is us and who is them. And the project of racism from day one has been to dehumanize people of color to justify the global conquest that Europe undertook in the 15th century onward. So this kind of structural racism based on discrimination that I talked about in terms of healthcare is a much larger project. And even though a lot of these structures of housing wealth discrimination and redlining and all kinds of healthcare discrimination, all those go together to sort of identify, and they work because on some level people of color are seen as less than. They are not us. They are, and I'm putting that in quotes, they are not quote unquote us. They are quote unquote them. Therefore, any disparity that happens is a little less important, a little more justifiable, because people like that. I mean, there's even sort of rumors going around early in the pandemic that Black people were genetically predisposed to get sick and die. And after the Civil War, there was a smallpox epidemic, and there was rumors going around at that time that it was hitting Black people, former slaves, very hard. And so some white people started circulating the idea that, well, they're going to be extinct because they're not fit to live on the planet. This is an inferior race, and God is taking his justice on this. There's this kind of thinking that goes back to 1492.
Civil War, and there were a lot of free slaves that are kept in camps outside of the white population. The reason why, because they are unfit, or they're gonna spread the smallpox to the white population. So
Sure.
those racist ideas come to justify a reality of inequality. I know it's normalized now under Trump, but it's way before Trump.
Well, that's why I'm going to go on a positive note here. And I think that one of the things I've been advocating for many years is to support programs of universal application. Like a few months ago, I wrote about a proposal for universal family care, which we now see happening during the pandemic. But this is before that. There's people organizing to get universal family care, saying that and there's all different parts to it. There's universal health care is another example, and I argue about that in favor of that. Public health is what I want to talk about a little bit too. This pandemic is widely understood and referred to routinely as a public health crisis. I find that very encouraging, because public health, the nature of public health, is it serves the health needs of the population as a whole. It's not aimed at anyone in particular. So if you have clean water, everybody gets it, unless, of course, you have a place like Flint, where, again, racism plays into that. But, the struggle becomes, how can we make it true to its essence, which is that public health is a universal system.
It's a human rights issue.
It's a human rights issue. And that's what was happening. Well, that's what the whole movement toward about healthcare, universal healthcare, is to see healthcare as a right, not as some sort of market-based commodity that is only accessible to people who can afford it. I want to mention a couple of groups. One is a really encouraging group called Public Health. Let me see. I got my notes here.
Well, I think I could share this here. Let's see.
Public Health Awakened is one of them. I haven't written about that yet. Okay. It's a group of public health workers who have organized to bring a specific anti-racist social justice focus to the field of public health, which is already there, but they want to be more self-consciously advocating for social change via public health, to make it really universal, to advocate for equal access to public health services. Oh, I lost you. There we are. Oh, I see what you're doing.
Yeah. So that's your last notes. You see that?
Yeah, I'm referencing something that's going to be the next note right now.
Okay.
But I guess my point, to simplify, is arguing in favor of a robust public health system is going to serve the needs of all of us. And this is a crucial point, I think, that I've been making for years. To argue in favor of a universal system sends a message that eligibility is based on your humanity, that you are eligible for a universal system if you are a human being in the United States, not if you are a certain color human being, not if you have a certain set of papers, not if you have a certain if you love certain people and don't love other people. None of that applies. It's universal. And I think the more we can orient ourselves toward a universal system of healthcare and other things, and a public health system that serves everyone, then we're underlying the idea that we really are all in this together, which is something that people like to say about the pandemic. But as we start out this conversation, that's just not the case. People of color and immigrants and all kinds of people are suffering at disproportionate rates in this system that admittedly does touch all of us, but it doesn't affect all of us the same.
It really, the whole notion that blacks are not fully human,
Right.
and a lot of people can be racist. That's fine. You're not bigotry everywhere, but there's a difference in this country when racism and inequality becomes a policy, becomes a structure, becomes
Right.
laws. And this is the problem we're facing now. We have laws that prevent blacks or colored people from being human, being fully human, getting their equal rights. It's accepted. It is something. It does not kind of lower resistance and appalling from a lot of people. We still accept it as a policy.
Well, the thing about racism is it's very flexible and it evolves to meet current conditions. So, well, a good example is the current court case in Florida, where they passed a law a couple of years ago allowing people who have been released from prison had been barred from voting. The referendum in 2018, I think, 2017 maybe, made it legal for formerly incarcerated people to vote. However, the Republicans in Florida legislature made a rule of some sort, so you couldn't vote until you had paid off all of your court fees, any fines, any whatever you had outstanding against you, which amounted to basically a poll tax. It's equivalent, and of course, felons in Florida are disproportionately people of color. So to exclude former felons in the first place is a racist effect, if not an intention. Without saying racism, you say felons. Without saying racism, you say people in legal debt. So, and when knowing full well that these groups have overrepresentation of people of color, so it's a way of that's an example of how
the language, the
these
narrative.
policies can be implemented without saying we don't like people of color. We just say people who are poor aren't eligible for Medicaid or voting or whatever it is. So they're another way that people are dehumanized and excluded from the group of us, the worthy people who deserve the bounty that is the United States and these other people. And that's what I wrote a piece back in September called Trumpism, the Wall, and Terrified Whiteness. And I was arguing that the wall that we keep hearing about, which is still under construction on the southern border, is a symbol, a concrete symbol of the idea that there are us and there are them. And they are on the other side of a conceptual wall, which is composed of whiteness. And us is everybody on this side of the wall. Them is everybody on that side of the wall. And again, by the wall, it's a construct to indicate that that it's not universal. It's the bounty of the United States is not accessible to everyone. It's accessible to the right kind of people. And you can talk about the wall and you can talk about us and them without really talking about race, even though everyone knows exactly what you're talking about.
With the way we reacted to this pandemic, it's almost like somebody says it's almost like a third world country, and I think the Mexican are the one who's building the wall to keep the Americans from escaping there. But speaking of racism, are you following the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, which is about few years ago? Why this is now became an issue, and why it took so long to arrest the white two men that they shot unarmed black person. He was just simply jogging.
I haven't been I haven't been following as closely as I will. Since I just published my last newsletter, so I'm catching up on my reading now. So I'm gonna.
Yeah.
But
Well,
Charles Blow is a good columnist for the New York Times. I read him a
yeah,
lot.
exactly. That's what it's a human rights issue. It is, as you said, it's not just hurting blacks and minorities, also hurting everybody, hurting America.
Well, the thing is, I think there are some people who I've read and spoken with who are so focused on Trump that they imply or seem to think that if we just get rid of Trump, then things will go back to the way they were. First of all, they won't. But secondly, if they did, the way they were was not acceptable. We still had a huge, in Minnesota, we'll talk about Minnesota, huge racial disparities in every category: incarceration, education, health, you name it, wealth, household income. So to go back simply to not go down the neo-fascist road of Trumpism is not good enough. We need to sort of, and I'm really encouraged, like I said, we're speaking about this as a public health issue. There are people organizing in the public health realm, in the social welfare. There's think tanks working on this. They're doing research. There's people saying we want to take this crisis as an opportunity to move ahead, not simply to go back to where we were 2 years ago or 4 years ago.
On that positive note, I think a little bit an optimistic. We have a long way to go, and hopefully, like when after 9/11 we invaded two countries, we caused 4 million people to die. We took advantage of this, and we brought the conservative agenda back, neocon, and all of that, and hopefully with this pandemic as a shock to the system and everybody, we took advantage of it, and we have a progressive agenda that can, to continue with the Green Deals and social programs that was started in the 60s. So,
well, any system under stress is going to morph into a new form, and it's really an open question if you're going to go in the fascist direction or you're going to go in the democratic direction. I don't mean Democratic Party. I mean democracy with a small d. And that's really up to us. And it's very hard to tell what's going to happen, but the work continues. Whoever gets elected in the next election or doesn't get elected, our work doesn't change. We keep saying we need universal health care. We need programs that serve all the people to make us as healthy and secure as we can be.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I always enjoy your notes, your email, and you can look for it. Nygaard's notes, and Nygaard, and it comes probably once a week or once a month. I'm not, depends.
Once or twice a month usually, whenever I can get it done. There's a lot of research.
Exactly. Yeah, but you have at least based on this, you have 654 notes or analysis or reflection on serious issue that this country faces. Well, thank you so much for giving us the time. And how you doing with the lockdown and social distancing?
Well, my biggest problem is it's hard to get exercise. I've been doing some running, but I don't like running. I normally play tennis or racquetball or something to keep moving.
Yeah.
Everything's shut down. In fact, they just closed the tennis courts, so I can't even do that. So I'm staying fit and stuff, but right now they're painting our house, so not only are we have to stay inside, all the windows are covered with plastic, so I can't even see outside. So I'm kind of going a little bit crazy, but I've been through worse, so we'll make it through this one.
Okay, you put in all this lockdown, all this time in a very good use by writing those notes and share it with us and educating us. Keep up the good work, and thank you so much for